What if the boy who lived couldn't do magic? What if the boy who lived couldn't do magic at all? What if the most famous wand in modern wizarding history was placed in the hand of a child who could not coax a single spark from it? Today, we deconstruct a timeline where Harry Potter is a squib. Picture this instead of an owl at the window. 11-year-old Harry is on the floor of the cupboard, spine pressed against cold brick, tracing invisible wand motions through the dark with a broken yellow pencil. The lead has snapped, the wood scrapes his fingers. He whispers, Wingardium Leviosa, then Lumos, the syllables memorized from a torn library book he was never meant to find. Nothing happens, not a flicker, not even the comforting illusion of a draft that might be magic. In the original series, the first spell is a revelation. Glass vanishes, a wand chooses its wizard, a boy on a broom discovers effortless, terrifying power. Here, the structure is inverted. The core issue is mechanical. Harry repeats the movements until his arm aches, but in this reality, the circuitry never connects. No accidental magic, no swelling ant, no regrown hair after Dudley's latest game. The Dursleys don't just suspect he is useless. They are proven right every single day he fails to bend reality. Now, hold that against the image burned into cultural memory. Harry shouting Expelliarmus in a blaze of red light, then strip it away. Replace it with a thin boy in Dudley's cast-off clothes, handed a cracked toy wand at a birthday party as a joke, swishing it in front of the telly while Dudley howls, because even pretend magic refuses to humor him. The divergence is finalized at the moment that should have saved him. No Hogwarts letter that changes everything. No emerald ink, no half-giant on a rock in the sea, explaining that the impossible things Harry did were magic, not madness. The scar is still there. The nightmare flashes of green light are still there. Somewhere in the Department of Mysteries, a dusty orb still whispers a prophecy about a child with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. But the boy under the stairs has no power at all. The subtext is brutal. Harry isn't just neglected, he is a powerless child in a world built around power. On one side, a Muggle family whose entire identity is built on hating magic. On the other, a magical society that treats squibs as an embarrassment, a clerical error in the bloodline. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated the moment anyone realizes the boy who lived can't cast Lumos, yet that same failure makes him useless as a symbol. So what happens to a prophecy when its subject cannot perform the basic grammar of spellwork? Does the wand choose Neville, the Ministry shelves the orb, and Voldemort quietly reorients his fear? Or does the wizarding world decide that if the Chosen One can't produce magic on command, the only way to keep the story intact is to break Harry instead? Redrawing the origin, prophecy, power, and a powerless child. To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning, back to a darkened room over the Hog's Head, a shivering divination teacher, and a sentence that detonates a war. Trelawney never says wizard. She never says greatest wand or most powerful spell. She speaks of a child born as the 7th month dies, a child with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, and a mark that makes them his equal. The language is clinical, almost contractual. It defines power as outcome, not method. The core issue is mechanical. The prophecy cares about who ends Voldemort, not how the final blow is delivered. From there, canon runs on rails. Voldemort hears a fragment, chooses Harry over Neville, and walks into Godric's Hollow. Lily refuses to move. The killing curse rebounds. A baby survives. In this timeline, that sequence is preserved exactly. The divergence is finalized not by green light, but by what happens months later in a much quieter room. Imagine Dumbledore, alone in his office, wand hovering over a chubby, scarred infant. He performs the standard diagnostics: magical potential, core responsiveness, ambient field interaction. The readings are flat, not weak, not unstable, absent. Harry Potter is a squib. On paper, nothing explodes. In reality, Dumbledore's entire long-term structure does. The boy he intended to educate, weaponize, and eventually march to his death is not a wand arm. He is a non-magical child branded with a magical myth. The turning point arrives in silence, with Dumbledore staring at the instruments and understanding that his favorite strategy, raising a sacrificial lamb, has just been removed from the board. The subtext is brutal. In the original timeline, Harry is an asset Dumbledore is willing to spend. In this fractured version, Harry becomes a liability, a living anchor to a prophecy that may now point cleanly at Neville Longbottom, and a symbol the wizarding world will be deeply tempted to misplace. It is easier, politically and psychologically, if the boy who lived simply never grows into the man everyone expected. Privet Drive still receives its cargo, the blood wards still rise. Those protections are grounded in Lily's sacrifice and Petunia's reluctant acceptance, not in Harry's own magic, so the circuitry of ancient protection does not care that the boy at the center cannot perform Lumos. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated all the same, but in a different direction, not by a child who keeps blowing up Aunt Marge, but by one who never does anything at all. And that raises the central question for this episode. If the world has written you into a legend you cannot physically fulfill, are you released from destiny or trapped inside a narrative that insists you are a mistake? When we deconstruct a timeline where Harry can never attend Hogwarts as a student, never hold a wand that answers him, we are left with a more dangerous, more tragic premise, a chosen one who cannot choose the role everyone else insists he was born for. This is where the psychological fracture begins. The wizarding world will move on to Neville, to Voldemort's next move, to new symbols of hope and fear. Harry will be left at number 4, under wards he doesn't understand, in a family that resents him, carrying a scar that promises power he will never access. In the next section, we follow that powerless child through a childhood built on absence. No letters, no invitations, and no easy way to step outside the story that was written on his forehead before he could walk. Privet Drive, rewired when the freak has no magic. Privet Drive does not explode when the boy who lived arrives. It implodes. Dumbledore walks up that neat suburban path with a baby who will never cast a spell, and that is not an accident. The core issue is mechanical. The blood wards he wants to anchor on Petunia do not require Harry's power, only Lily's sacrifice, and Petunia's grudging loyalty, so the absence of magic in the child on her doorstep is an inconvenience, not a deal-breaker. On this timeline, he tells her so. He speaks of Lily's death, of a dark wizard undone, of ancient protections that will make number 4 the safest place in Britain. Then, he adds a sentence he never utters in canon, delivered with surgical calm. He will never be able to do what your sister did. The divergence is finalized in 6 casual words. Petunia hears, "Your sister was chosen. This boy is defective." For Vernon, the psychological shift is immediate. In canon, Harry represents a ticking magical time bomb, a future lawsuit from a world he cannot control. Here, the threat is downgraded. No wands, no owls, no risk of his living room filling with exploding teapots. Instead, he sees a broken echo of the woman who ruined his wife's sense of normalcy, a permanent reminder that there was a club she never entered, and this member has been thrown out. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated in a different way. They are not hiding a freak. They are housing a failure. We deconstruct a timeline by watching its smallest rituals. Dudley grows up on presents and praise. Harry grows up on conditional survival. The cupboard under the stairs is still his, but the commentary mutates. When Dudley shoves him, it comes with a sneer, not even a proper freak. When Harry drops a plate and flinches, Vernon's voice is a low, almost satisfied growl. Even your dead parents did magic better than you. In canon, accidental magic breaks the tension. Hair regrows overnight. A jumper shrinks. Glass vanishes at the zoo. Each incident is a tiny rebellion, proof that the story written on Harry's forehead has not finished unfolding. Here, those moments simply do not occur. The sweater stays scratchy and beige. His hair remains butchered after Petunia's scissors. When he screams in the dark, the door does not rattle on its hinges. No unseen force pushes back. Every outburst ends in silence. The subtext is brutal. The world does not notice him enough to glitch. This eerie normalcy becomes its own horror. Harry senses that something in his reality is misaligned, but he has no sparks, no levitation, no inexplicable escapes to confirm it. The trauma is not that he is dangerous. It is that he is disappointingly safe. By 10, the pattern has hardened into structure. He watches from the front window as Dudley's birthday trip to the zoo pulls away, pressed against the glass, chest tight with a pressure that never becomes magic. No owl will swoop in to correct the injustice. No snake will wink and slide away in solidarity, just exhaust fumes and a lingering ache. So when the Hogwarts letters start flying, when parchment batters the walls of number 4 in a storm of emerald ink, what happens to a boy who has already learned that nothing special ever comes for him? And what happens when, this time, he might be right? The letter that never comes, Dumbledore's quiet decision. The letters do fly, but not for him. It is July again, heavy and airless, and Harry is counting down to his 11th birthday with a precision that is almost ritual. He has no reason, in Vernon's house, to expect magic or power, yet he has built a fragile theology out of crumbs, misses, Fig's strange vocabulary of measles and cabbages, the cloaked man he once glimpsed by the post office, the way Petunia's face shuts down when the word Hogwarts is mentioned on television. These are not proofs. They are lifelines. What if the world his parents died for is real? What if it has rules? And one of those rules is that, on your 11th birthday, it finally comes for you. Harry counts the days not because he is entitled, but because this is his last, desperate experiment with hope. When the first Hogwarts letter hits the doormat addressed to someone else, some other child in some other house, he does not know that his own name sits in a separate ledger, marked with a single damning notation. Here, we deconstruct a timeline that most wizards never think about. The Hogwarts enrollment process is a machine. The core issue is mechanical. Quills in the Ministry record every magical birth. A second, quieter system notes the exceptions. Squibs, those born to magic but outside its reach. Traditionally, no owl ever flies for them. At best, they receive discreet offers of help integrating into Muggle reality. At worst, they are family secrets, folded away. For Harry, though, the procedure is interrupted. Dumbledore intervenes. He personally orders that no owl be dispatched, no contact initiated, no admission that the boy who lived has no magic at all. From Dumbledore's vantage point, the turning point arrives the moment Neville's childhood accidents escalate into undeniable talent. Plants bloom at his touch, objects explode when he cries, and the prophecy's parameters, born as the 7th month dies, suddenly fit a child who can actually wield a wand, a squib. Harry becomes a dangerous variable. If Voldemort returns, a powerless chosen one is not a savior. He is a hostage, a symbol waiting to be broken on camera. Secrecy, Dumbledore decides, is mercy. The subtext is brutal. Better for Harry to be discarded than weaponized. At number 4, their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated in a quieter way. Vernon watches the absence of letters with smug relief, reading cosmic validation into empty air. Told you, he grunts, as if the universe has finally agreed that magic is a childish phase. Petunia's reaction is more complex. She is satisfied, yes, that Lily's son will share her dull, magicless trajectory, but the victory is poisoned. Every day Harry does not leave is a daily reminder that Lily did. Harry, meanwhile, performs the psychological arithmetic. No owl, no visitor, no explanation. Even the impossible world he has constructed in his head has apparently examined him and found him unworthy. And then the pattern breaks. No giant smashes down a shack door. No pink umbrella bends a gun barrel. Instead, we cut across the map to a different house, a different boy. Neville Longbottom sits at a kitchen table in a drafty old manor when his grandmother lays a thick envelope before him, emerald ink blazing his name. As he opens it, the divergence is finalized. The narrative lens swings away from the cupboard under the stairs and locks onto the true magical air, and the story we recognize accelerates. Only this time, it begins without Harry at all. A legend without its hero, Hogwarts, Year 1 minus Harry. What happens when the legend goes to Hogwarts without the boy who birthed it? What happens when the prophecy walks through the castle doors wearing the wrong face? In this section, we deconstruct a timeline where Year 1 unfolds on schedule, but the gravitational center is Neville Longbottom, not Harry Potter. The summer mail onslaught still comes. Envelopes pour into number 4, but they are all for one child. Dudley? No. In this reality, Harry's name never appears in emerald ink. In a drafty manner across the country, Neville's letter has already been opened, their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated, and Augusta Longbottom is quietly recalibrating her entire understanding of power and destiny. At Privet Drive, Vernon relaxes when no owl arrives for the boy in the cupboard. Petunia files it under Lily's mistake corrected by biology, a psychological bandage over decades of trauma. On the Hogwarts Express, the familiar dynamic rearranges. It is Neville who stumbles into the compartment with Trevor missing and hands shaking, only this time the whispers follow him. That's the boy who lived. Ron Weasley still sits there with a corned beef sandwich and secondhand robes, but his curiosity targets Neville's scar, not Harry's. Hermione Granger still bursts in, teeth too big and hand already in the air, but her fixation is on the prophecy child she has read about in modern magical history. Harry, meanwhile, is washing dishes, hearing the distant hoot of owls over Little Whinging and assuming they belong to someone else's story. The core issue is mechanical. Every canon beat still exists, but the structure of attention has shifted. At the sorting, the hat hesitates over Neville, weighing a lifetime of self-doubt against the prophecy's demand for courage. Gryffindor still claims him, to thunderous applause tinged with awe and fear. Teachers watch him a fraction too closely. McGonagall's corrections are sharper. Snape's contempt is colder. Quirrell's stutter tightens whenever Neville walks past. Dumbledore's gaze lingers a second longer at the welcoming feast, already beginning the subtle grooming of a weapon he did not intend to forge. Parallel to this spectacle, Harry's existence is downgraded to a footnote and a file. Mrs. Figg still accidentally bumps into him on Dudley's birthdays, her cats reporting more than her conversation does. Order members write dry clinical reports. Potter, Harry, Squib, no spontaneous magic observed. Dumbledore institutes a deliberate policy of non-interference, holding Harry in reserve as a Muggle-side contingency, a backup piece on the chessboard who can move through non-magical reality unnoticed. If the war fractures the statute of secrecy, the subtext is brutal. Neville is crushed under expectations he never asked for. Every miscast spell in Charms class feels like a betrayal of the dead. Every stumble in flying lessons an omen that the prophecy chose poorly. At the Halloween troll incident, it is Neville, Ron, and Hermione who stand in that bathroom, terror crystallizing into loyalty as Neville steps forward because the legend demands he must. Harry, that same night, is locked in his cupboard for spilling soup he did not spill, aching with a nameless sense that he has missed a train he was never invited to board. Year 1 converges on the stone. The trio still descends through the trap door. Neville's clumsy bravery still hardens into something real. Ron sacrifices himself on the chessboard. Hermione solves Snape's logic puzzle. Neville reaches the mirror and, in its glass, sees his parents restored and Voldemort gone, but himself simply ordinary. That yearning for normality, not glory, anchors him. Quirrell burns at his touch, Voldemort flees, and yet a question hangs in the smoke-filled air of that underground chamber. In his weakened state, fleeing through the Forbidden Forest, does Voldemort ever remember there was another child that night in Godric's Hollow? A boy with a scar and no magic, discarded by both worlds? If he dismisses Harry Potter as irrelevant, is this the first, fatal underestimation that will define the rest of this fractured timeline? Squib in the crossfire. When the war leaks into Little Whinging, Voldemort leaves the forest. The scarred Squib stays in Surrey. On paper, the two timelines separate cleanly at that point. In practice, the fracture leaks. Magic does not respect postal codes. When the Chamber of Secrets opens, when a basilisk prowls under a castle Harry will never see, the Muggle news in Little Whinging briefly glitches. A rash of petrified schoolchildren in Scotland, reports quietly retracted, migrating birds veering off course. A summer thunderstorm that hangs unmoving over Britain for 3 days. The core issue is mechanical. If the boy who lived never attends Hogwarts, the wizarding world's turbulence has to express itself through atmospheric pressure, failing electronics, and those uncanny headlines Vernon Dursley reads and then aggressively refuses to process. The structure of their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated by 1,000 micro-anomalies. Dudley's new private school closing for a week due to unexplained gas leaks, Aunt Marge's dogs howling at nothing, television signals cutting out precisely when the minister appears. By the Azkaban era, the subtext is brutal. Sirius Black escapes from a prison Harry has never heard of, yet his gaunt face stares out from every newspaper in the supermarket, framed by words like mass murderer and armed and dangerous. Harry notices the temperature in the frozen aisle fall 10 degrees in a breath. He watches a woman's breath fog in August. He feels a pressure behind his scar, not pain, but the awareness of being on the edge of someone else's war. He starts seeing things, not grand displays of power, just the fringes of magic brushing against his reality. A hooded figure at the far end of Magnolia Crescent, robes too dark to be shadow, standing absolutely still under a street lamp before vanishing when a car passes. A shape in a distant alleyway, tall and gliding, that makes his lungs seize and his thoughts slow. He has no word for Dementor, only the memory of a cold that feels personal. Mrs. Fig trips over a cat and reacts as if she has heard a gunshot, scanning the sky, fingers white-knuckled around her shopping. We deconstruct a timeline in which Harry Potter becomes valuable precisely because he cannot participate. The Order of the Phoenix, forced to adapt, realizes that a squib with the famous scar can move through Muggle institutions Death Eaters barely understand. Dumbledore never visits Privet Drive in person. Instead, Mrs. Fig begins to forget things. A sealed envelope to be dropped at a post office on the other side of town. A request that Harry keep an eye on the men loitering near the train station, writing down license plates in a battered notebook. Harry is not told what is in the parcels. He is not told that the robed figure on the corner is an order lookout, not a threat. He is given tasks calibrated to feel mundane while sitting at the edge of catastrophe. The turning point arrives when he realizes the pattern. The errands coincide with the strange weather, with the news of unexplained explosions, with the nights his scar pulses dully before he sleeps. Psychologically, this is its own form of trauma. Harry knows his parents died in this hidden conflict. He feels its gravity every time adults lower their voices around him, every time Petunia grips the countertop when the news mentions terrorist incidents. Yet he is kept powerless and uninformed by design. Curiosity gnaws at him. Fear answers. Resentment follows, directed at Dumbledore's distant benevolence, at Mrs. Fig's evasions, at a world that uses him as a blind spot while denying him the vocabulary to name it. One night, walking home from yet another harmless delivery, the temperature drops. Not winter cold, bone cold. The street lamp ahead flickers, and a hooded shape glides across the circle of light, draining sound from the air. Harry's knees buckle. There is no wand in his hand, no Patronus, only the thud of his body on wet pavement and the roar of his own collapsing consciousness. Somewhere above him, a wand light flares, harsh and white. A voice cuts through the dark, urgent and terrified, speaking his name as if it finally matters. Harry, then nothing. Dumbledore's confession, turning a squib into a strategist. Harry wakes to the sound of rain against glass and the distant hum of a refrigerator. No hospital beeps, no sirens, just the ordinary machinery of Muggle reality grinding away while his world has already ended twice. He is on a sagging sofa in a cramped sitting room, a blanket around his shoulders, teeth still chattering. In the doorway, framed by the weak light of a single lumos, stands Remus Lupin, exhausted, damp, and very obviously holding a wand. The Dementor is gone. The street is intact. The impossible has been confirmed. Dumbledore is waiting at the table. The headmaster does not wear his Hogwarts robes here. This is not a school. It is a safe house, a pressure chamber where a decade of lies will be vented in controlled bursts. He dismisses Lupin with a nod, then turns to Harry with a gaze that is almost clinical in its restraint. The turning point arrives, and it begins not with revelations, but with tea. Steam curls between them. Dumbledore speaks slowly, as if every sentence is a scalpel. There is a hidden world. His parents were not drunk drivers, but soldiers. A wizard called Voldemort hunted them because of a prophecy that named their child as a possible end to his power. Lily died to shield Harry. Petunia's blood made Privet Drive into a fortress. The Boy Who Lived is not a headline here. It is a failed narrative experiment. Then, the fracture. Harry asks the obvious question. If all of that is true, why has nothing ever happened to him? Why no letters, no accidental magic, no explanation until a monster tried to eat his soul under a street lamp? Dumbledore does not flinch. The core issue is mechanical. The prophecy spoke of a child born as the 7th month dies, but it never guaranteed that child would wield magic. In this timeline, the wand chooses no one. Harry Potter is a squib, and the subtext is brutal. He was left ignorant because, in Dumbledore's calculus, a powerless boy was easier to hide than to weaponize. Awe arrives first. Raw and incandescent, magic is real. His parents died for something vast and terrible and important. Then horror follows, slower, heavier. Every birthday at Privet Drive, every slammed door, every time the Dursleys told him he was nothing, Dumbledore knew and did nothing because the structure of the war made Harry a low priority asset. Finally, the question, edged with new steel. If he cannot do magic, why is he still part of this war? Dumbledore answers with strategy. Voldemort's arrogance is a system vulnerability. He does not fear squibs. He barely acknowledges their existence. Magical detection wards are calibrated for wands, traces, underage sorcery. Harry, with no magic at all, can move through Muggle institutions, schools, police records, social services, without tripping alarms. Where Death Eaters target Muggles, Harry can be present, unnoticed, mapping patterns, feeding the Order intelligence that no Auror could gather without breaking the statute of secrecy. In other words, we deconstruct a timeline where the Chosen One becomes the unseen operator, the liaison between a hidden war and the oblivious majority it endangers. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated not by spells, but by information. Harry waits for the wand, for the belated letter, for some miraculous exception to the rules. Instead, Dumbledore slides a battered Muggle notebook across the table. The pattern interrupt is almost absurd in its simplicity. No phoenix feather, lined paper. If you cannot cast spells, Harry, he says, voice finally warming, then you will learn to cast plans. In that moment, the divergence is finalized. Heroism is no longer a question of raw power, but of design, of psychological insight, of loyalty to a world that will never know his name. Rewriting the trio, Ron and Hermione's war, Harry's shadow. What happens when the architect of the story never walks onto the stage? What if the boy on the outside of the castle walls is the one quietly threading its internal alliances together? Inside Hogwarts, the trio reforms, but the geometry is different. Neville is the reluctant center of gravity, the prophecy's spotlight dragged over from Harry's empty desk. Hermione becomes the intellectual engine in a far more literal sense, turning every spare hour into research on prophecy mechanics, ancient protections, and the psychology of fear. Ron, stripped of his usual role as comic relief, hardens into the emotional glue and tactical improviser, the one who can read a room, call a bluff, or turn a losing chessboard into a stalemate that keeps people alive. And orbiting them, never enrolled, is Harry. The core issue is mechanical. He cannot contribute power in the way the wizarding world measures it. No Patronus, no shield charms, no dazzling duels in abandoned classrooms. So he begins building a parallel skill tree. While his friends master spell lists, Harry masters bus routes, public records offices, and the dead spaces in CCTV coverage. He learns how to sit in a Muggle police station and overhear patterns in missing persons reports. He studies emergency response protocols, Muggle law, and how bureaucracy can either hide or expose a war that most people cannot even see. By Goblet of Fire, that divergence is weaponized. As Neville's name erupts from the Triwizard Cup, Harry is not in the Great Hall. He is at Privet Drive, reading a local paper that should have been boring. It is not. Scattered among the classifieds and football scores, he notices a pattern of disappearances, rural families, odd scorch marks on houses, gas main explosions that do not fit the infrastructure maps he has quietly pulled from the council offices. He writes to Hermione, not with melodrama, but with coordinates, dates, and a question. Why do these align with old Death Eater trials she once mentioned? Hermione cross-references. Ron tests the theory against his father's muttered reports from the Ministry. Neville, already waking in cold sweats from dreams of a graveyard, reads Harry's letter and realizes those dreams are not symbolic, they are logistical. The trio enter the third task not as clueless competitors, but as a cell that has rehearsed for an ambush they still cannot fully prevent. They fail to stop the resurrection, but they do not walk in blind. The subtext is brutal. Harry, who has never sat an exam, is coaching the Chosen One through panic attacks in cramped order safe houses, talking Neville through grounding exercises he picked up from Muggle therapists' leaflets. Their letters become a lifeline, Hermione sending spell diagrams annotated with, "Does this match what you're seeing out there?" Ron enclosing rough maps of suspected Death Eater safe houses, Harry replying with bus timetables and aerial photos torn from library atlases. We deconstruct a timeline where the dynamic is inverted. The castle holds the wands, the suburbs hold the reconnaissance. Harry's squib skill tree fills in the blind spots of magical arrogance. He can walk into a crime scene the Aurors will reach hours later, unnoticed, because no one wards against a boy with no magic. As Voldemort returns fully and the Order scrambles, the question sharpens. Can this war be won by wands alone, when the enemy is adapting in both worlds? Or will the one person Voldemort never bothers to guard against, the boy who cannot cast Lumos, be the fracture in his supposedly perfect design? The Ministry, the media, and a boy the prophet forgot. The fracture finally goes public on a rainy, unremarkable evening. The Order is moving a witness through Muggle London, Moody barking codes, Tonks changing her face every 30 seconds, Dumbledore walking with that deceptive, drifting calm. And in the middle of this very secret, very magical convoy is the one person no one has ever thought to disillusion, a thin teenager in Dudley's hand-me-downs, scar visible under a flickering street lamp. He is supposed to be invisible by narrative, not by spell. That is the mistake. A Daily Prophet stringer, staking out a rumored Auror operation, catches the angle no one warded against. Alastair Moody, Nymphadora Tonks, Albus Dumbledore, and a boy whose forehead writes its own headline. The core issue is mechanical. You cannot obliviate a photograph already flown via enchanted wire to Diagon Alley, not without alerting precisely the people you are trying to deceive. By morning, their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated. Boy who lived without magic, screams the prophet. Subheadings proliferate. Squib savior or sad sideshow? Did Dumbledore hide a powerless Potter? We deconstruct a timeline where Neville has spent years under the crushing weight of prophecy, only to wake up and discover that the baby in the crib next door has been edited out of the public record and then reinserted as a curiosity. The media narrative fractures along familiar fault lines. Some columnists frame Harry as an inspiring symbol, proof that survival and loyalty matter more than raw power. They point to Mrs. Fig, to Filch, to every quiet squib who has lived in the walls of wizarding reality and never been named. Others are viciously practical. If Harry has no wand, was Voldemort's fall just an accident of Lily's blood magic? Did this boy steal Neville's spotlight by existing at the wrong coordinates of the prophecy? The subtext is brutal. Pure-blood supremacists seize on Harry as a talking point, a living diagram of their prejudices. This, they say in Wizengamot corridors, is what comes of Muggle-tainted lines. Even in the Order, where no one would dare say that aloud, the dynamic is quietly revealing. Strategy meetings are about wards, patronuses, counter-curses. Harry, with nothing to raise but his hand, is talked over as soon as discussions turn to spell work. He is finally in the room. He is finally in the story. He is not, in any meaningful sense, counted. Psychological reality hits him in stages. For years, Harry has carried a private, inverted imposter syndrome. He knows he really was the baby in the crib, that his mother really died for him, but the world's narrative has flowed around Neville, not through him. Now, overnight, the prophet pins his photograph to the center of the board, only to annotate it with quotation marks. The other boy. The Squib Potter. He walks through Grimmauld Place, hearing his parents' names for the first time in official briefings, and yet every mention comes with an asterisk. He is evidence, not heir. The turning point arrives in a cramped kitchen, the Order crowding around a table scarred by a century of arguments. Plans for the final confrontation are being drawn in wand movements over parchment, Neville's role, the Elder Wand's allegiance, the protections over Hogwarts. Harry pours tea, passes maps, and feels himself sliding back into the domestic background, from living prophecy adjacent to logistical footnote. Then, Dumbledore dismisses him, gently, and something in the structure of Harry's patience snaps. "What if you are all thinking about this wrong?" he says, voice cutting across the low roar of tactical debate. What if the only person Voldemort will never shield against is exactly the one who cannot duel him? Every wand lowers a fraction. Every eye turns. Harry lays out a single, radical proposal, a way to weaponize his squib status, the prophecy, and Voldemort's obsession with magical power in one converging move, a plan that would put him at the center of the ending without casting a single spell. We stop before they answer. A different endgame, how a squib traps the Dark Lord. The room does not explode into applause, it fractures into logistics. Dumbledore does not ask whether Harry is certain, he asks where. The core issue is mechanical. Harry cannot duel, cannot counter-curse, cannot meet Voldemort in the traditional grammar of power, but that very absence becomes the fulcrum. No magical signature, no traceable spellwork, no reason for Voldemort to consider him anything except a symbolic nuisance. Harry proposes a battleground that weaponizes that blind spot, a Muggle landmark, dense with concrete and cameras, quietly seated by the Order with layered protective enchantments, not Hogwarts, too mythic, too expected. Imagine an abandoned underground station beneath London, its tunnels mapped by Arthur Weasley and its structural weaknesses catalogued by Hermione. To the Ministry, it is urban detritus. To Muggles, it barely exists. To Harry, it becomes a machine. Doors that lock on timers, lights that can be killed from a single breaker, load-bearing beams charmed to resist magic but not gravity, a structure designed so that a boy who understands emergency exits better than Expelliarmus can choreograph the end of a war. The turning point arrives when Harry brings wand lore into this concrete labyrinth. He has studied the Elder Wand as if it were an engineering diagram. Canon tells us its loyalty follows defeat, not raw magical output. The subtext is brutal. The wand does not respect ideology, only outcome. So Harry constructs a chain of defeats that does not require him to cast a spell, only to win. First, the Order identifies the wand's current master, whoever disarmed or bested Voldemort last in any capacity. Then, Harry engineers a non-magical confrontation, a trapdoor, a collapsing catwalk, a muggle-stunned baton slipped into Neville's belt for plausible deniability. Someone defeats the wand's master by being the last cause of their incapacitation, even if the mechanism is gravity and steel, not curse and counter-curse. When that master falls, because Harry pulled a lever at the right second, wandlore says the Elder Wand's allegiance flows, technically and mechanically, to Harry. He never raises a wand, he still wins the duel. On the night itself, Neville and the Order stage the visible war at the surface. Spells flash along the Thames, Death Eaters clash with Aurors, and every divination-addled seer in Britain would swear the final battle is happening there. Underground, in the echoing dark, Harry moves through the chaos unseen by magical detection because there is nothing to detect. He kills lights, slams reinforced doors, floods side tunnels with water to corral Voldemort into a single, sigil-ringed chamber. Here, the prophecy stops being mystical and becomes psychological. Neither can live while the other survives, is reframed as a binary choice Harry forces upon Voldemort. In this sealed space, with the Elder Wand now treacherously attuned to a squib, Voldemort faces an intolerable dilemma: kill the non-magical boy, and admit that his entire ideology about blood and power is meaningless, or spare him and leave the prophecy structurally unresolved, a permanent fracture in his own legend. Voldemort, predictably, chooses ego. He casts the killing curse at a target he still refuses to acknowledge as a true opponent. But the divergence is finalized in the mechanics. The Elder Wand, loyal to Harry through that orchestrated chain of defeats, will not channel a killing blow at its master. The curse twists, rebounds through the same wand that once betrayed him in a different timeline, and collapses his body without a single triumphant shout from a boy wizard. There is no dazzling counter-curse, no soaring beam of light. Voldemort dies because he cannot comprehend a threat that does not fit his worldview, because a squib turned architecture, wand lore, and prophecy into a cage he willingly entered. And when the dust settles, the question is no longer who killed the Dark Lord. It is who, exactly, the wizarding world has been underestimating all along. And that, in turn, sets the stage for the aftermath, a society built on magical supremacy, forced to reckon with the boy who saved it without casting a single spell. After the war, redefining power in a post-Voldemort world. So what happens when a civilization built on wands and bloodlines wakes up to headlines crediting a squib for ending its darkest war? What fractures when the boy who lived becomes, in whispered revision, the boy who planned? The morning after the battle, Diagon Alley is a contradiction in brick and cobblestone. Fire whiskey flows, Weasley's wizard wheezes, has a queue down the street, and somewhere a battered wireless plays a triumphant Celestina Warbeck track on repeat. In the leaky cauldron, they raise their glasses to Neville Longbottom, the warrior who stood wand to wand with Voldemort and walked away. But in the quieter corners, the narrative mutates. Someone mentions the final trap. Someone else mentions the squib with the scar, who walked into the Forbidden Forest unarmed, and somehow walked out with a dead Dark Lord behind him. The core issue is mechanical. Wizarding power has always been quantified in spells cast, duels won, exams passed. Yet the decisive blow in this timeline is not a spell, but a structure. A chain of psychological manipulations, wandlore exploits, and battlefield geometry that a non-magical mind assembled. Neville's killing curse is spectacular. Harry's contingency plan, which turns Voldemort's own wand and arrogance against him, is the reason it works. The subtext is brutal. A culture that dismissed squibs as failed wizards now owes its survival to one. From there, we deconstruct a timeline of institutional panic disguised as progress. In the Wizengamot, ancient witches in plum robes argue over technicalities. Can a squib be awarded the Order of Merlin if he never cast magic? Does the Defense Against the Dark Arts curriculum need a non-spellcasting track? One conservative elder snarls that heroism without magic is a dangerous precedent. Another, more pragmatic, notes that Muggleborns and squibs were invisible to Death Eater targeting grids, and that this financial technicality forces a rethink of how the Ministry allocates wartime resources. Hermione Granger, now a war heroine with ink-stained fingers and a terrifying grasp of both Muggle law and magical precedent, seizes the opening. She pushes for integrated magical Muggle task forces, arguing that squibs are not embarrassments to be hidden with fake correspondence courses, but bridges. Aurors partnered with Muggle police on anti-dark raids, squibs embedded in Muggle governments as early warning censors. The divergence is finalized when a revised Statute of Secrecy subclause quietly authorizes non-magical operatives in official ministry roles. Harry, meanwhile, is the eye of this ideological storm. He is offered medals, an honorary Hogwarts diploma, even a specially created title, Strategic Advisor to the Auror Office. He accepts some, refuses others, and mistrusts all of them. For a boy raised in a cupboard, the sudden insistence that his mind and courage were always the real power feels less flattering than retroactively convenient. He walks through a world still reflexively checking for a wand in his hand before addressing him as an equal. Neville tries to correct that. In his victory speech on the ruined Hogwarts steps, he does the unthinkable. He steps back. He names Harry, explicitly, as the architect of the final plan, the one who turned my wand into the last move of his strategy. The crowd is uneasy. Applause for a squib does not come naturally, but it comes. Then there is the older generation. If Dumbledore survives in this version, or McGonagall inherits his mantle, the apology is formal, public, and precise. They admit to years of secrecy, to treating Harry as a symbol rather than a child, to assuming that no magic meant lesser value. It does not erase the trauma, but it reconfigures the dynamic. The institution finally says out loud what Harry needed to hear at 11, that his worth was never conditional on spells. The most jarring reckoning, however, happens in a small kitchen in Little Whinging. Petunia Dursley, who weaponized the word useless against a boy she did not understand, is confronted with newspaper photographs of that same boy shaking hands with the Minister for Magic. She learns, in clipped, embarrassed sentences, that the world she spent decades denying almost ended, and that the nephew she hid from her neighbors helped save it. There is no grand reconciliation, just a quiet, stunned "you" and Harry's equally quiet "yes." The power imbalance at number 4 is permanently inverted. Years later, the pattern interrupt arrives on a foggy September morning. Platform 9 3/4 hums with steam, owls, and nostalgia, but Harry isn't there to board the train. He stands back from the barrier, hands in his pockets, watching a new generation surge toward Hogwarts. Among them are children with ministry-issued letters that do not promise wands, but specialized foundational courses for squibs, magical theory, Muggle interface, strategic operations. A small boy with no visible magic clutches his ticket as though it might vanish. Harry catches his eye and nods. No speeches, no prophecy, just the quiet reality that the boy is going somewhere Harry never could, through a door Harry helped open by never walking through it himself. In that image, the wizarding world's definition of power has been irrevocably altered, not destroyed, not reversed, reframed. And the question hanging over the epilogue of this fractured timeline is simple. If a squib can reshape the aftermath of a war, what else in this society was never about magic in the first place? Why a powerless Harry might be the most dangerous version. What if the most dangerous person in a magical war is the one person who cannot use magic at all? What if the boy who lived grows up knowing, in clinical, humiliating detail, that he will never hold a wand that answers him? In this fractured timeline, that single absence functions as a scalpel. We deconstruct a timeline where removing Harry's magic doesn't diminish the conflict. It exposes its internal wiring. Their claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated on two fronts. The Dursleys cannot pretend magic is a distant aberration, and the wizarding world cannot pretend its prejudice is theoretical. A squib, chosen one, becomes a mirror. Everyone's priorities are suddenly, uncomfortably visible. The core issue is mechanical. Once the prophecy attaches itself to a boy who cannot cast Lumos, every institution has to declare what it really values. Dumbledore's response reveals a refined utilitarianism. Does he protect a powerless child for his own sake, or retain Harry as a symbolic asset, a living narrative about Lily's sacrifice that can still mobilize wands? Voldemort's reaction is even more revealing. Does he dismiss Harry as a non-threat and pivot fully to Neville, or does his obsession with defeating death force him to hunt the prophecy's wording to its bitter end? Unable to imagine that power might exist outside spellwork, the subtext is brutal. By existing, Squib Harry indicts a culture that pities Filch, hides Mrs. Fig, and treats non-magical birth as a quiet failure. Every time a witch flinches at the word squib, while praising Harry's courage, the hypocrisy is audible. In canon, the power the Dark Lord knows not can be misread as some rarefied, love-flavored spell. Here, stripped of pyrotechnics, it is unmistakably human, the capacity to love without leverage, to choose self-sacrifice when you cannot win a duel, to see intrinsic value in the powerless because you are one of them. Canon Harry's heroism is often framed through spectacle. The Patronus at the lake, the Triwizard Maze, the final wand clash in the Great Hall. Squib Harry's courage operates in a different register. He becomes a strategist, not a prodigy, a coordinator of safe houses, a Muggle liaison, the one who walks unarmed into Death Eater-controlled London because detection wards do not notice him. His defining acts are not disarms, but refusals, refusing to let prophecy dictate his vocation, refusing to internalize the Dursleys' contempt, refusing to treat Neville or Hermione as the real heroes, while he fades into logistical support. Emotionally, this Harry is a sharper avatar for every reader who has waited for a metaphorical Hogwarts letter that never came. He is ordinary on paper, excluded by the core institution of his world, repeatedly told he is not enough for the narrative he was promised. His eventual victory, engineering the wand backfire, baiting Voldemort into a duel he cannot actually fight, turning the Deathly Hallows into evidence rather than armaments, lands harder because nothing about it is inevitable. He changes how the room works, without ever being the most gifted person in it, and once that door is open, the imagination has to keep walking. If a Squib Harry can rewrite the end of the war without a wand, what happens if we reframe other minor figures through the same lens? What does a world look like where Filch is the security architect of Hogwarts, where Mrs. Fig is the Order's primary field agent, where the child in the back of every classroom, quiet, ungifted, allegedly irrelevant, holds the one form of power no Dark Lord is trained to see? In that question, the divergence is finalized, not as a plot gimmick, but as a challenge. Who else in this universe becomes dangerous the moment we stop measuring worth in sparks and spells? Your turn. Who becomes the new hero in a Squib Harry timeline? So where does that leave us? At the end of a timeline built on absence, we deconstruct a timeline where the boy who lived cannot even cast Lumos, yet still walks into the center of every decision that matters. Recap the path. It begins in a cupboard, where accidental magic never comes, where doors stay locked and haircuts stay bad, and the Dursleys' claim to normalcy is structurally annihilated not by hovering puddings, but by the psychological fracture of realizing the dangerous child is, in fact, powerless. It moves through Dumbledore's quiet betrayal and reluctant recruitment, where a squib is filed under asset in an old man's war cabinet. It culminates in a final battle where no Patronus ever leaves Harry's hand, yet Voldemort still falls, because a boy with no wand understands power, prophecy, and wand lore better than the man who spent a lifetime chasing immortality. The core issue is mechanical. Remove Harry's magic, and the prophecy's spotlight swings wildly. So who stands in that light for you? In a Squib Harry reality, does Neville inherit the full hero mantle, the unambiguous chosen one, whose arc is no longer a late-blooming surprise, but the spine of the narrative from year one? Or does Hermione, unburdened by the myth of the boy who lived, become the architect of a fairer magical society, using Harry's outsider perspective on Muggle systems to redesign the Ministry's entire structure from the ground up? Or do you hand the story to someone more unexpected? Imagine Luna, who already lives half in another world, treating Harry's lack of magic not as a deficit, but as a different wavelength of power, building a resistance that operates in both Muggle and wizarding realities at once. Imagine Dudley, raised on the same staircase landing, dragged into the war as the one Dursley whose muscles finally mean something when Dementors descend on a commuter platform. The subtext is brutal. Once you stop measuring worth in sparks, the entire cast reorders itself. Here is your assignment: choose one canon scene and fracture it. Take the Yule Ball and write Harry as the strategist in the shadows, orchestrating alliances while everyone else is distracted by dress robes and diplomacy. Take the Department of Mysteries and place a squib Harry in the front as the decoy the Death Eaters underestimate, mapping the room's geometry while wandfire flies overhead. Take Snape's memories and let a powerless Harry be the one person who cannot be tempted by the rush of spellcraft, only by the raw, unadorned trauma of a man who loved and lost. Drop your rewrites in the comments. Who is the hero? What scene do you break? And where does Harry stand? In the crossfire, in the control room, or in the moral center no one else can hold? Here's why this matters. This entire what if rests on a simple human truth. Being ordinary, disadvantaged, or dismissed does not erase your capacity to matter in extraordinary stories. It only changes the angle from which you enter the frame. So subscribe, hit the bell, and watch for the follow-up, because the sharpest alternate scenes and boldest hero pitches may be featured, expanded, even fully animated. And if the next episode opens not with Harry at all, but with a quiet, allegedly irrelevant character stepping forward because you put them there, what does that say about the kind of power you're ready to imagine in fiction and in your own life?